She had 6 hours left to live, at least, that's what the doctors told her. Claire Harrington, one of the most powerful CEOs in the country, a woman who had built an empire from scratch, now lay in a hospital bed fading away from a rare blood condition no treatment could stop. Her board had already begun whispering about successors, the media was preparing the tributes, and her enemies were waiting like vultures. Everyone had given up. Everyone, except a quiet single-dad veteran who had walked into the hospital for a routine check and would unknowingly carry the one thing capable of saving her life: his blood. What neither of them knew was that this miracle would not only save her, it would change both of their destinies forever. Claire Harrington had always been the kind of woman who refused to break. She had survived hostile takeovers, scandals, betrayals, and even the lonely climb to the top of a world built to crush anyone who dared rise too fast. But now, as she lay in a quiet isolation room surrounded by machines that beeped slower each hour, she found herself fighting a battle she couldn't out-negotiate. Her rare blood disorder, triggered by a combination of stress, genetics, and an undetected infection, had progressed beyond anything the medical team had seen. They tried transfusions, they tried experimental therapies, they tried everything, and everything failed. She listened as her lead doctor explained in a trembling voice that without a precise, extremely rare blood antigen match, her organs would begin failing by morning. Her company's board was already meeting in secret. Her staff cried freely. Claire simply closed her eyes, not out of despair, but out of exhaustion. She had fought too many battles alone. Perhaps this was the last one. Across the city, Jack Turner stood in the hospital lobby waiting for his 8-year-old daughter Lily to return from her pediatric appointment. Jack was a decorated veteran, a medic who had patched up soldiers in deserts and mountains, who had lost friends he still dreamed about every night, and who now worked 2 jobs to keep his little girl safe, fed, and smiling. He wasn't thinking of blood donations, or CEOs, or medical miracles. He was thinking of Lily's school project, and whether he could pick up another shift to afford the materials she needed. When a nurse approached him to ask if he would participate in a routine veteran health screening, he said yes simply because he had time while waiting. The moment his blood sample hit the scanning system, the quiet hum of the lab broke into frantic activity. Jack didn't understand what was happening when 2 doctors rushed him into a private room, explaining with barely contained excitement that he had one of the rarest genetic markers in the world. A match. A perfect, impossible match for a patient who would die without immediate transfusion. Jack didn't even ask who it was. His instincts as a medic took over. If someone was dying and he could save them, then there was nothing to consider. Meanwhile, Claire drifted in and out of consciousness, the world around her blurring into lights and whispers. She heard hurried footsteps. She heard someone say, "We found a match, unbelievably perfect." She felt needles, felt warmth returning to her body, felt a strength she hadn't felt in weeks. When her eyes finally opened fully, she saw a man sitting quietly in a chair near her bed, not near enough to disturb, but close enough to make sure she was breathing. Jack hadn't planned to be there. The doctors insisted he rest after the donation, but he had insisted on staying near the person his blood was rushing to save. Claire's voice was barely more than a whisper when she asked who he was. Jack stood slowly, shyly, introducing himself as nothing more than a dad who happened to be here at the right time. But Claire saw more in his eyes: strength, humility, something rare in a world filled with people who only took from her. She wanted to thank him, but emotion tightened her throat. For the first time in years, she felt vulnerable not because she was weak, but because someone had saved her expecting nothing in return. As hours passed, her color returned, her heartbeat steadied, and the doctors called it a medical miracle. Jack simply called it doing what anyone should do. But Claire knew better. Not anyone could have saved her. Not anyone had blood like his. Not anyone had chosen to stay and make sure she lived. As she fell asleep again, she heard Lily's giggles down the hall as she ran to hug her father. And in that fragile moment, Claire Harrington felt something she had not felt in years: hope. And that was only the beginning of how a dying CEO and a quiet single-dad veteran were about to rewrite each other's worlds. Recovery was slow, but every day Claire found herself thinking about the man who had saved her life. She asked the nurses about him, learned of his military service, learned of his daughter, learned how he worked himself to exhaustion to provide for her. She wondered why a man like him wasn't a hero the world already knew. She wondered why someone so strong walked like he carried the weight of several worlds. Jack, on the other hand, tried to keep his distance. He had no business stepping into the world of CEOs and boardrooms and people whose shoes cost more than his monthly rent. He told himself he had done his part. His job was done. But every time Lily asked, "Daddy, how's the lady you saved?" he felt a pull he couldn't explain. Days turned into weeks. Claire returned to work to discover a board that had nearly replaced her. But the new Claire wasn't the same woman who had collapsed on the conference room floor weeks earlier. She looked her partners in the eyes and reclaimed her company with the quiet fire of someone who had been to the edge of death and walked back stronger. Still, even in victory, she found her thoughts drifting to Jack. She invited him to a private thank you event her team had planned, but he refused. She invited him again, this time personally, and he still refused, feeling out of place. It wasn't until she visited his modest apartment, standing awkwardly at the door with flowers in hand, that he finally saw the truth. She wasn't thanking him as a CEO. She was thanking him as a woman whose life he had saved. Lily loved her instantly, proudly showing her drawings, asking if she really ran a giant company. And Claire laughed with a warmth she hadn't felt in years. Jack watched from the kitchen, seeing a side of Claire the world never got to. Soft, gentle, human. Their bond grew naturally. Coffee turned into shared stories. Stories turned into late-night talks. Jack helped Claire heal from the trauma of carrying an empire alone. Claire helped Jack believe he deserved happiness beyond survival. Yet their worlds were still different. Claire's life was public, loud, chaotic. Jack's life was simple, quiet, private. Every step toward each other required courage. The turning point came one evening when Claire attended Lily's school recital. She sat proudly in the third row next to Jack, unnoticed by the world for once. When Lily finished her performance, running into both their arms, Claire felt something break open inside her. She wasn't meant to live her life alone. She wasn't meant to die alone either. She had been saved not by luck, but by purpose. Jack walked her home that night. Neither spoke for a long while. Finally Claire stopped, turned toward him with vulnerability she rarely showed, and said softly, "You didn't just save my life. You reminded me why it was worth saving." Jack's reply was equally quiet, equally raw. "You gave me something too, a life to dream about again." As the city lights shimmered around them, Claire reached for his hand, not as a CEO, not as someone powerful, but as a woman choosing the man who had given her a second chance. Jack took her hand without hesitation. Two lives, both cracked by circumstance, had found their way into each other's healing. And that was how a dying CEO and a single-dad veteran discovered that sometimes the blood that saves a life also awakens a heart.